Hello and welcome to the Quantum Bridge. Now, the good thing about having a new platform is we have new guests, and tonight we have Charlotte with us. Welcome to the show, Charlotte.
Thank you very much for having me on, Gary
You're
and
welcome.
Kath.
And I shall pass over to my colleague Casper to start the show for us.
You think I'm going to let you get away with this, don't you? I'll be back to you soon. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the Quantum Bridge. And of course, again, Charlotte, welcome. Thank you for joining us for the first time.
Indeed, for the first time. Pleasure to be.
Hopefully the first of many.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
You're not obliged
there, Charlotte was. Yeah, well, let's see. Anyway, given that we know Charlotte to a very small degree, and certain people out there may not be familiar yet with Charlotte at all, I'm going to turn this over to you, Charlotte, and ask that you introduce yourself and give us a sense of your world and where you're at the moment.
Thank you so much, Casper. Right, so my name's Charlotte Gracias. I am the co-founder of the Together Declaration, or Together Association, as that's now called. My background in campaigning and activism started probably around 2012-13. It was very local. So I used to get quite frustrated about things like bins not being collected and parking problems and local crime, and I realized that I was probably the only person in the neighborhood who was willing to do something about it. So I would go around and knock on neighbors' doors and go, I'm really angry about this, and then they'd go, yeah, and then go, well, why don't you do something? Okay, I'll do it. And I realized that I was actually quite good at galvanizing people and contacting our local councillors, and I still know them really well, and doing a little bit of police liaison. So once you've managed to sort of crack one problem, you do another, and stuff like that. So I realized I had a knack for that. And then through the councillors I got to know, I ended up doing some canvassing for the Labour Party, and I used to be a Labour Party. I used to be a bit of a lefty anyway. So and it was interesting. It was a bit of an eye opener. The bit that I really enjoyed was actually going around, knocking on people's doors and talking to them. So I would go and knock on a door and talk to the people and listen to what they had to say. And these councillors would be like, come on, we need to move to the next door. So I said, well, don't you want to listen to what people have to say? No, we haven't got time. Just give them the leaflet. So that was a bit of an eye opener. Hence to say, I never became a member of the Labour Party or anything. So that sort of carried on for a bit, and then actually Brexit hit, and that's when I got onto Twitter, because I thought I was the only person that was going to vote to leave at the time, and then I realised after the vote that loads of my friends and family had. So I got onto Twitter, tweeting various things. And then managed to get the attention of, well, actually, no, I became really interested in Julian Assange because he was in the Ecuadorian embassy at the time. So this is kind of 2018. So I've been on Twitter for years. Then his mum, because I was quite vocal, his mum used to sort of tweet me back. So we'd have a little bit of interaction. And then she'd message me and say, like, I think he's going to get arrested soon. And I said, are you sure? And she said, yeah, they've taken his internet down. So this went on for months. I got kind of closer to the campaign, and about a week before he got arrested, I went to the Ecuadorian embassy, and that was really interesting. Actually, I've never seen so much surveillance in my life. They were you're actually aware when you're there that you're being watched, and would walk past, and you'd look at them and think, your security services. And they clearly were. So I got to know the people there, became involved in the campaign, started tweeting. That got a lot of traction. Then he got arrested the week after, which was on a Thursday, I remember. And I remember tweeting, and a couple of people said to me, why don't you organise a protest? I said, I've never done that before. I did. I got together with some people. We organised the first protest outside Belmarsh prison, and that took 4 days. And we were lucky enough to get George Galloway there at the time, and a few sort of independent journalists. So that was my first kind of foray into kind of campaigning on a slightly more media level. So I joined the Julian Assange campaign, met loads of amazing people, kind of understood how campaigns ran. Did that till about 2020 when COVID hit. Again, I think from day one I was tweeting, and I work for the NHS, so it was difficult but interesting at the time. And I was tweeting openly my name and kind of telling it as it was without revealing anything, trying not to put myself in a very difficult position or my employer.
You didn't do
And
dancing videos or anything, did you?
no,
Oh,
do you know, this is an interesting fact. Apart from arts, none of those videos are actually shot at a hospital.
I something was telling me that, yeah.
Yeah, none of our in my hospital, they didn't do it. Bart's hospital were the only ones that did. They did it outside, or they've got a really nice fountain because I know someone that was actually part of that. But yeah, it was very, very interesting, that TikTok video. I think it was very, very rehearsed. So yeah, I was tweeting. I got a lot of traction, and I was annoying people like Piers Morgan and some of the well-known doctors who used to sort of peddle their pro-lockdown, pro-mask theories. A lot of them blocked me, and I became a bit of a target, so I used to get trolled mercilessly. And luckily, I managed to evade any Twitter um, bans or anything. Towards the end of 2020, I think I'd been interacting with Alan Miller, James Melville, Tonya Buxton, and a few other people. And then we ended up sort of all meeting in late 2020 during the third lockdown with a little party. And then it kind of went from there. So I joined the Time for Recovery group, the Heart group, who's been kicked off Twitter several times. So we all kind of came together. And then as while we were in the third very long lockdown into the beginning of 2021, we said we need to meet, we need to do something. And there were things happening in the background anyway. We all met, and it was great. The groups were forming quite nicely, and it got into 2021 August after some of the big marches. And Alan Miller suggested that we put together, and that was great. And I didn't really know at the beginning what was going to happen. We had some fantastic campaigns. The first one was the vaccine mandate campaign, and the vaccine passport campaign, because obviously some of the industry were going to be sort of hospitality industry events were going to be hit by having to ask people for vaccine status before they came in, and we knew that would probably disadvantage the most poorest and most vulnerable. It always is. So it kind of went from there. We had a guy working with us called David Fleming, who was absolutely brilliant. He put all the logos together, and they're very powerful. I don't know if you've seen them, the sort of black, white on black. It's very eye-catching.
I'm not sure I can consciously remember them. I probably have.
Yeah, and we had these placards. We've still got them, actually. They're sort of about that big, and people carry them at protests. When you see a picture from some of the protests with our placards, they're very, 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 it's a very powerful image. So we've still got them. We use them with different kind of wording on them and stuff like that. So I think I'd been to, I don't know whether you guys have ever been to any of the protests, but I went to the earlier ones from 2020, May 2020, where there was just a handful of people. So it was really nice to see them.
Very early.
Yeah, they grew, to sort of August, September 2020, about 35,000, and then
they were getting up to very decent numbers. My only thing ever with those was that I'd somewhat felt, and I'm only saying this because I imagine there are some people at least out there that may have felt this, is that they sort of started at some point to be headlined. And I had that, again, because this was a very top-down, or I felt it to be a very oppressive top-down approach that we were already under, the idea of having people sort of headlining things. But actually, I do get the sense that ultimately it was more about unity, a whole load of people there who were behaving as free, the new normal. So just from that context, they were probably beautiful things anyway. But I don't know. I just had a somewhat knee-jerk reaction to that thing of sort of there were still people being put up as being not necessarily above, but it was their voices that were being heard, when I felt that this whole movement, and I got that sense from you and from you guys since we've been interacting, is about all of us having a voice and pushing back, rather than, because if we hitch our star to one or two individuals and those people are quote unquote discredited, that might not matter to many of us, but it might matter to enough of us to damage that sort of pushback and movement. So anyway, I just say that was one of my concerns about that, although I think it was a very noble thing that people were going out and physically showing their dissatisfaction.
I think it's an interesting point, because I'd heard that all the way through. It was why so and so speaking. What if they don't represent me? And I think that the problem being is, no matter who you put in the spotlight in terms of the wider freedom movement, Not everyone's going to like them or agree
No,
with
of
them.
course not. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was, but and some people just like going on the marches because they've met loads of people. We've all met friends at marches. Some people like because they wanted to listen to someone. Some people wanted music. So it was very hard. And actually, what was going on is different groups were organising the marches at different times, and then there were divisions and stuff like that. Because people were competing and stuff. But at the end of the day, I think they were all amazing, especially the ones I think in summer 2021 that when we got up to about 1 million. And then it kind of like sort of, I think once most of the restrictions had gone, I got the sense that people thought, oh, it's okay now, just get on, you know.
Mm.
And then we had the vaccine mandate threat. They'd already done it to the care workers, they'd been thrown under a bus. And then it was the NHS. And then I worked for the NHS. So that was really useful to me to be part of together because I knew how NHS trusts work in terms of, the sort of top-down NHS England down. And I think most of the trusts, I got the feeling anyway, the London Trust probably didn't want to introduce vaccine mandates because they stood to lose a lot of staff.
But by the way, just to touch on that, before you go into that more, because I think that's a really interesting area to touch on. The other thing is that we've been presented with a lot of concepts as being true, and this is how it is. Like, for example, the whole idea of there being actually an NHS. The NHS as we knew it, or certainly I knew it as a child when I was younger, didn't exist for quite some time, even in the run up to this. So there'd been for a long time this whole thing of trust. There'd been my feeling at least was that those were operating in some way autonomously, and that therefore this whole thing of support the NHS and all these other, the whole raft of nudging techniques and words that have been used to, I believe, coerce, others might say to nudge, for the greater good anyway, that actually a lot of these things that are presented to us don't really exist or don't exist in the way that they're given to us. So I'm really glad that you're now touching on the area of the difference between the NHS and actually the trust and how the structure is. So I'd love to hear more about that.
No, it made a valid point. The trusts are meant to operate like businesses. And that was the whole point of a trust, here, make some money, sort of here's your budget. But then there's this whole top-down sort of, flow of orders and guidance and rules that comes from NHS England, from the CQC and various other bodies, NICE and NHS providers, stuff like that. So it's a really odd sort of organisation, if you like, if you can call it that. But to your point, individual NHS trusts behave completely differently. And what I realised is through the vaccine mandate campaign, for example, some trusts like Southampton really, really aggressively pushing the vaccine mandate and almost bullying their staff, whereas the London Trust and the bigger cities trusts, I'm guessing because you've got a slightly different demographic and a slightly more switched on, diverse demographic, were less inclined to be bullied, if that makes sense. And there was less, probably, that even though they're still bullying, I think the NHS chief execs of those trusts knew that it wasn't going to be possible to do that. So I think on the whole, they stood to lose about 15% of their staff, and maternity units were going to close. My understanding is that Sajid Javid had been told to withdraw at some point, but he was kind of not sure whether he was going to do that or not. Our campaign was gaining so much traction. NHS staff had previously never spoken out before, were really angry. And I know even within my trust, my colleagues, even though, they believed in choice with vaccination, they didn't believe that anyone should be forced to take it. And that is actually, I believe, the stance of most NHS staff. And they were quite horrified. Even things like Hep B is a requirement, and there is no such thing as a mandate for a vaccine in the NHS. So there's this fallacy that they're all required to have a Hep B. You take Hep B because you might be concerned that you might catch something when as part of a procedure and stuff. But it was never mandated. And then there was a whole thing about insurance, and I think the BMA and the GMC were slightly nervous about insurance in terms of if they enforced vaccine mandates. So they didn't. So anyway, our campaign gained traction, and there was that glorious moment when Sajid Javid went to King's Hospital and Dr. Steve James spoke out.
That's right.
Yeah, and that kind of just flipped it. So I think that was probably what Sajid needed to, to pressure him into revoking the mandate. And then within a few weeks we did. But that was a very, very good, very successful campaign. Most of our campaigns have been really successful. And then now we're kind of focusing on like the ULEZ 15-minute city, all this nonsense care workers campaign. So we are doing a lot. I think the way Together works and how it works and why it's successful is because we get a lot of just people on board and they drive our campaigns really. So we've got about 300,000 signatories and I think 4,000 paid members, and the membership's growing slowly. So they're involved, you know. We get hundreds of emails from them. They shape the campaigns really. We send emails out and we've got calls to actions, for example. Email your MP, email your local council, email this organisation, and that's really effective because you get a few thousand people doing that. And what we're trying to do is build up sort of ambassadors in local areas so that they can set up their own groups and stuff. But to the reason we're on this call is obviously I've gained quite a lot of traction on social media sites.
Yeah.
And I had so going back a little bit at the end of 2020, because I'd been tweeting my own name, I got a call from my manager at the time who said, we've had a complaint about one of your tweets. Now, this was
just to reframe that, that's within the NHS Trust that you're working
with? Within the NHS Trust, yeah. And so considering I'd been tweeting for 9 months in my own name, I did say to her, I said, which tweet? You know, because I would have thought that it would have been more. And she said, look, we've had a few complaints, but this one in particular, could you delete the tweet? I did that. And she was actually really nice. And says, look, I know you've got really strong views, but you've got to understand the position of the trust, blah, blah, blah. So I decided it was probably in my interest in this for me to shut that account down. I'd already had a backup account running. Yeah. And I don't think they minded me being anonymous as long as there was no link back to the trust. Yeah. So the backup account is still running. But that got nuked in April 2022. Me retweeting the Pfizer data dump stuff. So I didn't actually say anything of that. And then, as you know, I joined LinkedIn a couple of months ago, hadn't posted much. In January, I started posting, got a lot of traction within 5 or 6 weeks.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And,
it helps when you're really saying stuff that other people, you see, the other thing with LinkedIn, there's a lot of people, as we both know, I think Gary's less involved with LinkedIn, but as you and I both know about LinkedIn, a lot of people have that as effectively their corporate face, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, they might agree with almost everything or everything that someone like yourself is willing to put out. But they just know that is going to mean they might lose that account, and that might be almost inextricably linked to their commercial everyday activities and might actually result in them losing their job. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't do that. But at the same time, I do understand why when you came along and started saying a lot of things that, you know, a lot of people were resonating with, it was wonderful. And hence why what you're just about to come on to say was all the more painful for many of us. But anyway.
Yeah, and I fully understand that. But like you said, for some people, it's their only kind of business link. They've got a lot of great connections, which they're doing business with. Yeah. And there is a chance. And I know there's a few people I know who said they would outrightly lose their jobs if they say anything, you know, that goes against narrative. So I'm not in that position, and I didn't think that anything I was saying was putting my own job or my organisation at any.
No, absolutely.
So I was fortunate, and obviously being the co-founder of Together, I kind of felt like I had to kind of represent that point of view. But they took 4 of my posts down within a week. And I didn't have much warning when they finally. Well, I knew it was coming because obviously I put that post out to say, you know, I think they're going to take me down. But I think it was just whoever is in the background in LinkedIn must have seen that, oh, this person's getting a lot of traction, 1,200 followers within 5 weeks, 500 connections. She's saying a lot of stuff that's like, let's get her off because, you know, I was making a lot of waves clearly. But, you know, the question is, we shouldn't, you know, we all put up with this censorship, but we shouldn't be censored. No one should ever feel like they can't say something. And none of us are inciting violence or being outwardly racist or offensive. So I've had to deal with that. And I do take it really personally when it happens. I was really quite upset. You know, I lost my Twitter account, especially when I lost my LinkedIn account, because you lose the connections.
That's right.
As well. Mm. You know, and there's people that you've been interacting with and you want to, you know, you want those relationships to grow because you're learning from them and from you. And I was really fortunate that I managed to pass on my details to you.
That's right.
That's
right. And it was only, by the way, I mean, that came fortuitously because a number of my other connections had been booted off. So I was like, oh, goodness, anybody else who's saying stuff that I'm really resonating with, I better make the overtures now. Because, and then a week or two later,
it's gone. And, you know, and they wouldn't let me appeal either. And I tried everything.
Yeah.
But, you know, well, I can see now that I've actually got my Twitter account back. Things on Twitter aren't as bad. You know, it seems to be a slightly different place because of the changes that have come about with Elon Musk. I'm not sure he's the savior everyone thinks he is, but it is better. You know, you can talk about certain things, but it would be good if and I know LinkedIn is meant to be a business networking site, but it would be good if they followed the lead and you know, weren't as weren't as keen to censor people.
But there's not, in the broader sense, Charlotte, for me at least, there is nothing more commercial than allowing creative people to have a dialogue, right?
Exactly.
If people are doing things that are overtly hateful, and I don't mean in the way that that's legislated for, I mean not from the heart, I sort of understand. But in the end, the reason that we have had a society where generally it has been fairly tolerant, right, is precisely because people could have a form of dialogue and go away having learned something, maybe maintaining their former position, maybe changing slightly. But it's that grows for me a healthy society. And having people like you censored, and of course I'm censored, right? And it just means that I haven't been able to say things because that would have affected, you know, people have got mortgages. People have got all sorts of loans. We're living in a system that basically says you can't say anything because look at the lovely life you've been allowed to garner for yourself. You know?
And how long have we all been doing that for? Because I remember it took me an awfully long time to actually get onto Twitter and LinkedIn. Because at the back of my mind, I was saying to myself, oh, I ought to be careful. I ought to be careful. I was self-censoring. And then eventually I did go and I thought, I don't care. You know, we've got to be brave and not care, but not everyone's in that position. But it was there was a guy that writes for the Brownstone Institute, Coggon, I can't remember his first name now, Robert Coggon, and I had a little bit of interaction with him, and he was telling me about there's a European code of practice that all the social media sites have to sign up for, and it is basically censorship, and if they don't, they get hefty fines. So I'm pretty sure that is part of the reason that all the social media sites are censoring everyone. And Facebook's doing it, Instagram's doing it, but it's incredible, isn't it? Because LinkedIn's an American company. They're American companies having to sign up to this European code of conduct to operate in Europe, but they're also doing the same thing to their American.
Well, we all know that this is pan-national anyway, and that the whole thing here is that we're not pushing back against the people that we can see. We're pushing back against the unseen forces, the pressure groups, and the other powerful and really rich entities that aren't visible every day, because those sort of people are not going to put themselves up for being got back at. As per what we're seeing now with this gradual reveal. Thankfully, there is a gradual reveal, but that reveal at the moment is still only happening at a certain layer. It seems to a lot of us, I think, Charlotte, you may or may not agree, but I believe certainly to Gary and myself and many others who might watch this, will have that sense that, okay, this has opened up our minds and awareness to the fact that there is a pervading force which appears to be unified in terms of its messaging, that is preventing us being legitimate human beings or beings at all, i.e. expressive, creative individuals, which could build a much more beautiful and interesting world if we're just allowed to get on with it. So their agenda is directly affecting the fact that we can't fulfill our own individual and joint agendas. And there are millions, if not billions of us, and there can't be very many of them. So hopefully you and I and Gary can have another discussion about what you've been doing, about the organization itself, and about how we can actually structure a pushback in a way where we can directly see that we're affecting that change. And I appreciate that's already something that you're you're well on the path.
No, I think so. I think probably, the next stage is, how do we tackle this? How do we um, uh, inform people? Because I think a lot of people aren't aware of what goes on in the background. And when you tell them, did you know that there's this rule that says that you can't say this? So they'll understand perhaps why they're self-censoring in a way.
Yeah.
There's an awareness. Like I said, before I joined Twitter or LinkedIn, I was aware that you couldn't say certain things. I didn't know why.
Yeah.
So I think that the next topic to cover probably is that, how do we raise awareness? How do we make people understand what's going on? What's the bigger picture?
And I think that part of that is actually, how do we reduce this level of fear? Because we've had 3 years. I mean, we may have had lifetimes, right, of this, but certainly in this lifetime, I've had 3 years where this went from being something that I just knew was percolating in the background, but actually I could sort of live my day-to-day life, to suddenly you can't live your day-to-day life. Or if you do, you're going to be vilified, not just by those telling you about it, but they've managed to convince everybody else around you pretty much that also you are doing something outrageous if you try to continue to live what I would say was a fulfilling and natural life.
Yeah, I think I think almost everyone's had their life turned upside down in 3 years, and if you hadn't, you're probably living in some kind of bubble out in the middle of nowhere. But
well, there were many bubbles.
There were many. Let's not talk about the bubbles. Yeah, but what the last 3 years did do is it's actually woken a lot of people up. People that I knew had never questioned anything before suddenly are sort of, oh wow, hang on a minute, this is really wrong. What's going on here?
That's the beautiful aspect of it, isn't it? That actually, as much as it upset us and many that we know, it has percolated out. And I think also, to be fair to a lot of people, they just didn't believe that this thing could keep chucking on and on.
Yeah. Most people thought after I think the first lockdown was over, that's it, a couple of months will all be done. And then, and then they did the tiers, and then the second lockdown. I think that's when a lot of people went, well, hang on a minute, what are you doing? Because they just kept pushing it, and then it kept, like you said, it was going on and on and on. It was mandates, and now we're moving on to net zero and climate lockdowns and 15-minute cities. And actually, the one thing I was going to say is, the traffic restrictions in all their various forms have woken up an absolute another layer of people.
Yeah, brilliant.
It's been great.
It's going to take different buttons and triggers to wake different groups up, basically.
Are you saying, Gary, there could be some positive nudging going on?
I believe there is, yes.
Right, on that bombshell, I know we're going to run out of time, and I don't want to suddenly wind this up. So, Charlotte, can I say from both of us, I'm sure Gary will say anyway, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's been really, that time went very quickly.
I know, it goes incredibly quickly. But look, hopefully you'll join us again. And I think there's a wealth of things to expand on. So if go away and reflect on it. Don't commit now, but we'd love to see you again if you feel.
No, I'm telling you now, I'd love to, because I think we've probably got quite a few subjects to cover.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's been absolutely pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
No, likewise. So from the Quantum Bridge, thank you for tuning in, everybody, and watching.
Have a great evening. Thank you, everyone watching.